the last but not least, session 7, strengthening the culture of peace, tolerance, and reconciliation. Kindly, everyone who's not speaking, could you kindly turn off or mute your microphones? We're getting a lot of feedback. So the next session is strengthening a culture of peace, tolerance, and reconciliation. A very important topic, perhaps one of the most challenging areas for society, but particularly for those in conflict and post-conflict context. I would now like to hand over the stewardship for this session to our moderator, Dr. Bakala, founder and executive director of the African Child Policy Forum. Dr. Bakala, you have the floor. Asifa Bakala, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Thank you very much. Can you hear me, Totamrat? Can you hear me?
I can hear you and you.
Yes, thank you very much. Hello, ladies and gentlemen from Addis Ababa. It's raining very heavily right now. I hope you can hear me well. Look, welcome to this last technical session on strengthening a culture of peace, tolerance, and reconciliation. This is a rather complex and somewhat elusive subject. But as Ato Tamrat said, this is really a subject that's exceptionally important and fundamental to Africa's development. The real and difficult question is, how do you bring about a culture of peace and tolerance and reconciliation? So we hope to discuss in this session ways to promote human rights, social cohesion, and peace, and how to address, perhaps prevent is a better word, intercommunal and interethnic conflicts, xenophobia, hate speeches, and such dangerous and poisonous tendencies. To help us navigate through the complex set of issues and provide us with insights into how we, as a society and as a continent, can take the path towards greater humanity, inclusiveness, and I would even say greater enlightenment, we have with us a distinguished cast of speakers, people who have thought about the issues, who have written about the issues, and have spoken on behalf of the issues. Our lead speaker is Mr. Adama Dieng. Mr. Dieng, a Senegalese jurist, is Under Secretary General and Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide. He was, prior to that, Registrar of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and has headed numerous human rights fact-finding missions around the world. Before joining the United Nations, Mr. Dieng was Secretary General of the International Commission of Jurists based in Geneva. Since 2019, he has been entrusted by the UN Secretary General to lead and coordinate within the UN system the implementation of the strategy and plan of action to address hate speeches and deal with genocide issues. I have the great honor and pleasure to introduce Mr. Dieng. Mr. Dieng, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, my dear brother. At the outset, friends, allow me to thank my friend and sister governors for her invitation to share a few remarks with you at the opening of this 7th session. This Africa Dialogue Series 2020 taking place at a time our world is facing a huge challenge which should only increase our aspiration and commitment to serve humanity, hence the need for solidarity and unity. As the UN Secretary General has said many times recently, COVID-19 does not care who we are, where we live, what we believe, or about any other distinction. Every country has been affected by this pandemic. COVID-19 is not sparing lives in Africa. While the virus was slow to reach the continent compared to other parts of the world, numbers of infection have grown exponentially in recent weeks, and the trend is continuing. More than 3,000 people have died from the virus so far across the 54 African countries. So, ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this session can be read as an answer to what is required among other measures to silence the guns in Africa. It is about strengthening the culture of peace, tolerance, and reconciliation. As proclaimed in the preamble to the Constitution of UNESCO, since wars begin in the minds of men, the defense of peace must be constructive. Silencing the guns is more than ending the wars. Silencing the guns is about human rights, economic, social, cultural, civil, and political. Silencing the guns is also about promoting tolerance, justice, and accountability, reconciliation, and living together, as well as early warning. Violent conflict which result into atrocity crimes do not just happen overnight. ECOWAS is one of the most successful sub-regional organizations, and we have witnessed many situations where this sub-regional organization was able to prevent the wars to happen. And it has demonstrated to some extent the essence of timely and decisive response to the risk of armed conflict. So early warning can be successful only if it is linked to early action. We cannot silence the gun without respect for human rights. Let's never forget that when we speak about human rights, we are referring to a legal framework, to obligations states are bound to respect. Regrettably, in some African countries, governments have used the COVID-19 crisis to promulgate laws against misinformation or hate speech. Instead of protecting people, these laws risk repressing freedom of opinion and expression. Silencing the guns is also addressing the power of words. Let's never forget that words kill as bullets. As a former registrar of the ICTR, I witnessed the trial of the media case, the famous radio hatred in Colleen. But let's not forget that the genocide of the Tutsis did not start with the machetes. It was preceded by words. It was preceded by hate speech. The surge in global hate speech today has been one of the less spoken about consequences of the coronavirus. And despite this dearth of attention, the impact of hate speech is serious and far-reaching. Social media are powder kegs for the spread of these dangerous sentiments, and in certain circumstances, a proliferation of hateful messages, misinformation, and disinformation on social media platforms puts people's lives at risk. COVID-19 has also exacerbated hate speech in Africa, especially against foreigners, refugees, migrants, as well as Africans from the diaspora who are being stigmatized as potential vectors for the virus. So we know that hate speech is an indicator of the risk of atrocity crimes. In its most dangerous forms, it can incite to the commission of atrocity crimes. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, hate speech heightens the disproportionate effects of the disease on certain communities, exacerbating underlying social and economic inequalities and aggravating the drivers of violence. Therefore, if not properly addressed, the COVID-19 pandemic and the related hatred and hateful rhetoric poses a significant threat to the maintenance of international peace and security. I'm glad that an African country, Morocco, was the first to follow up on the Secretary General appeal by organizing a high-level conference on the role of religious leaders to address the multiple challenges related to the virus. And this event also discussed ways religious leaders can contribute to tackle COVID-19 related hate speech in line with the first plan of action and the UN strategy and plan of action on hate speech. In the context of the appeal, my office published a guidance note on how to address and counter hate speech related to the COVID-19 pandemic, The guidance note is based on the United Nations Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech that was launched by the Secretary General in June last year. It includes recommendations to member states, UN agencies, funds and programs, new and traditional media, civil society and religious and civic leaders, as well as influencers on ways to address and counter hateful rhetoric linked to the pandemic. I encourage all actors around the world to implement the recommendation provided in the guidance note. We can defeat COVID-19 and put an end to hate speech, stigmatization, and discrimination that has resulted from this period, but only if we remain united. The lives of too many people, including of Africans residing inside and outside of Africa, are at stake. I therefore encourage all relevant stakeholders to enhance their solidarity and multiply their action against COVID-19 and the virus of hate. And I will conclude simply by reminding each of us that we are living in a time which is exceptional. I mean, I think what we have been witnessing since the appearance of this virus, the consequences are enormous. And we can say that this is one of the most serious crises since the end of the World War II. But speaking about human rights, let's never forget it is a legal framework. And I would like once again to thank you, my dear brother, and I congratulate again my sister, Awanas.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Adama Dieng. This was a short but extremely powerful introduction to the discussion. I was particularly affected by your lucid expose about words preceding bullets, and therefore the poisonous impact of hate speeches and the virus of hate, which you talked about, is something that's exceptionally important. Important also is your narrative on the various dimensions of silencing the guns, the human rights basis, the abuses of human rights, vulnerabilities which lead to a situation where we don't really silence the guns, but the guns take over. Thank you very, very much, Mr. Adama Dieng, for your excellent presentation. We now turn to the second part of this session, which is a panel of discussants. So there are 4 discussants, and do I see? I think we do have Lual Mayan. Do we have Dr. Solomon Ayala? Do we have him? Are you around, Dr. Solomon? I don't see Dr. Solomon. In any case, we have 4 discussants, and they're each supposed to have 5 minutes. And I have been instructed by the organizers that that would very much appreciate that you stick to the 5 minutes allotted to you. Now, on our program, we're supposed to start with Dr. Solomon Ayala. Dr. Solomon, are you there? I don't see on the panel here Dr. Solomon, but I do see our second speaker, Mr. Edward Motoko. Are you there? Okay, then let's go to the second speaker, Mr. Edward Motoko. Mr. Motoko has a very, very impressive CV and credential, really. He's currently the Assistant Director General at UNESCO for Priority Africa and External Relations. Prior to that, Mr. Motoko served in various parts of Africa and the world, including Ethiopia, Colombia, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, among others. He has extensive experience in conflict prevention, particularly in Africa. And one of the most remarkable things also in his CV, I thought, was his strong intellectual engagement as reflected in the numerous publications. He has issued various publications and reports on peace and conflict, among them the endogenous foundations of a culture of peace in Africa, and several other reports and working documents on the culture of peace in Africa and Asia and Latin America. Mr. Motoko, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. Do you hear me? First, I see. Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. With your permission, let me say particular greetings to my sister Beyonce, who has organized this dialogue and which I met lastly in Tokyo. Thank you very much for inviting me and UNESCO to be part of this dialogue. And also Adama Dieng, which I know for many years. We worked together like 25 years ago in Burundi, Rwanda, and we started some of our Culture of Peace programs. So I'm very happy to meet him again through this webinar. Actually, I mean, 5 minutes enough for me because Adama Dieng said it all about the culture of peace, starting from the UNESCO's constitution and the whole aspect of education, of conflict prevention. But let me say a few words about where we are now, today, with the crisis, with the COVID-19 crisis. First of all, Africa is not an exception. Actually, the consequences of the COVID-19 in education, hate speech, etc., happens everywhere. But because of the magnitude of the continent, and because of the diversity of the continent, and because of everybody is looking at Africa as a place where the crisis would probably explode more than elsewhere, there is a big interest on what happens to Africa, what will happen to Africa. And I think that the COVID-19 gives us also the opportunity to rethink as African, our own Africa, the future of Africa. And this is important, and we have to take this opportunity to reflect on what does it mean today, culture of peace in Africa. You remember we have the decade on culture of peace and non-violence for children. And there is a report that will be submitted soon by the SG on the culture of peace. I think that this is an opportunity for us to review and to rethink the concept of culture of peace itself, which was launched in Yamoussoukro, Côte d'Ivoire, 25 years ago. Reflect on what? Reflect on root causes and the nature of conflicts in Africa. They have changed. We are not speaking only of armed conflicts. The nature of conflict have changed. The COVID itself has brought about new challenges in terms of other types of violence are prevailing in Africa. Adama said it. Violence which create instability, insecurity, violence against women, girls, violence against minorities, ethnic or religious minorities, violence against migrants within Africa. I hope that the concept of silencing guns is not only limited to armed conflict, but cover all these aspects. And this is important. I would suggest that we look at the new root causes of the conflict in Africa, and there are many of them that are not apparent, and which jeopardize the social cohesion of our countries, and that we need to identify, in order to put in place the appropriate programs, whether in education, whether to the media or with the communities. But let's be positive. If you look back in the 80s, the years 80s, 90s, when Africa was when the issue of democracy, democratic transition were starting in Africa, we didn't have all these new technologies. Today you have more transparency. Today you can know what happens in Ethiopia, what happens in Rwanda, what happens in Uganda, in just by going through the smartphone. And even though there are only 4-5% of the African population who have access to internet, it makes a big difference compared to the years 80s and 90s. And Adama, just to finish, Adama mentioned the genocide in Rwanda. Can you imagine if you had internet, if you had all the social media, if we had all this WhatsApp, etc., probably we would have been able to stop or to aggravate even the conflicts. It depends where you are. There are more democratic institutions in place. Let's also be positive of what's happened in Africa. There's an increasing awareness of communities about their rights. The young people are dynamic. There are in many community associations, young associations trying to push their own idea. I think we have to look also these issues. And at the end of this meeting, one of the follow-up will be really review a new analysis of the root causes of the conflicts in Africa in order to develop appropriate programs based on what is positive now for Africa, what can be done, and taking advantage especially of the dynamism of our young population. I will stop here, Mr. Moderator, and I'm open to any question if there are any after. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Motoko. One thing that I'd like to remind the discussants and other panelists is perhaps to dwell less on the problems and the challenges arising from the virus, the coronavirus, but focus more on the substantive and very difficult but very important issue of how to promote peace, tolerance, and reconciliation in the context of the new challenges. So it would be very much welcome if you were to reflect and articulate your views on how we can go about promoting a culture of peace in Africa. Okay, without much ado now, I'd like to go to our next speaker. I see that Dr. Solomon, I saw him on the panel. Dr. Solomon, I think, is on the screen. I think he's joined us. Can you hear me, Dr. Solomon?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, thank you. Now, Dr. Solomon Ayele is the chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, an exceptionally important and influential organ of the African Union. Dr. Solomon has a distinguished stature in his own capacity, having written extensively on constitutional issues, human rights, peace, and security. He's also the adjunct professor at the College of Law and Governance at Addis Ababa University, among his many other credentials. I'd like to invite Dr. Solomon to take the microphone. Dr. Solomon, to you, please.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Asifa. I would like to start off by thanking Her Excellency, the Undersecretary General and Special Advisor on Africa, Biens Gawanas, for the kind invitation extended to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, for me to share with you some insights from the side of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. It's also a pleasure for me to be on this distinguished panel together with my seniors, the people that I look up to, whose footsteps that I have been following. I have taken note of your direction, Dr. Asifa, but in the light of the context in which we are discussing the main theme of this Africa Dialogue series, it would be difficult not to mention or make reference to COVID-19 and its impact. COVID-19 presents an unprecedented challenge not only to public health, but also to the social and economic well-being of many people around the world. In Africa, fears of major explosion of COVID-19 with high rate of morbidity and mortality have not been borne by events on the continent. Both the rate of spread of the virus and the mortality resulting from it remain low. Actions mobilized at the national level, both by the state and non-state actors, have been critical. The role of the African Union in providing high-level leadership for regional coordination and multilateral action and assisting states through the Africa Center for Disease Control has been exemplary. Although Africa may have a chance of escaping the worst of the coronavirus pandemic, it is unlikely to escape from the COVID-19 socio-economic and humanitarian fallouts. As the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Ms. Bachelet, and myself pointed out in a joint statement we issued 2 days ago, these fallouts from COVID-19 carry grave risk of pushing millions of people into extreme poverty, with catastrophic consequences to the human rights of the most vulnerable, unless urgent measures, including notably international fiscal and economic relief measures, are taken. The fallouts are not without major consequences to the peace and security of the people of the continent. Indeed, as the Peace and Security Council itself has noted, the socioeconomic fallouts from COVID are feared to exacerbate existing fragilities and source of tension and insecurities, and to give rise to new forms of fragilities and tension. COVID-19 measures have also interfered with ongoing peace processes, as Commissioner Shergi pointed out, including in the Central African Republic and South Sudan, among others. These consequences can undermine the quest of the African Union for silencing the guns in Africa. It is incumbent on us to ask why. Why Africa faces such dire risks despite the fact that it hasn't witnessed major explosions of COVID-19. This question is central to our understanding of why the world should heed the calls of the African Union Assembly, that of the UN Secretary General, and that of Ms. Bachelet and myself for global solidarity. As Secretary General Guterres put it when launching the Africa policy brief 2 days ago, solidarity with Africa is an urgent imperative. In our joint statement, Ms. Bachelet and myself underscored that the mobilization of international fiscal and economic relief measures is a human rights necessity, whose observance is critical to avoid catastrophic consequences to the social and economic well-being of the most vulnerable. There is a need for ensuring that the worst peace and security impacts of the socio-economic and humanitarian fallouts of COVID-19 is avoided. This is critical for enabling the continent to sustain its efforts towards silencing the guns, an initiative necessary for ensuring protection of the human right to peace provided for in Article 23 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the founding treaty of the African human rights system. In this context, in pursuit of Secretary General Guterres' call for global ceasefire and that of the AU Commission Chairperson for cessation of hostilities in Africa, there is a need to focus on the life-saving efforts of fighting the threat. In the interest of fighting the threat posed by COVID-19, it's imperative for the AU and UN to seize the opportunities of announcements of ceasefires in Cameroon, South Sudan, and Sudan for bringing various warring factions in these countries to the negotiating table. The right to peace in Africa is in short supply and is challenged in various parts of the continent by conflicts and other insecurities, despite progress that has been achieved, including in putting in place the APSA, the African Peace and Security Architecture. As the study of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights on human rights in conflict situations established, these weakness in the security sector. Violence involving terrorist groups continue to affect many countries, and these groups often tap into existing challenges, including historical marginalization, regional differences involving ethnocultural and religious identity, weak presence of state institutions, and the absence or inadequacy of the provision of basic services, and the resultant vacuum. Various AU member states have also experienced violent political crises resulting from electoral disputes and contestations over constitutional term limits. In these instances, as in others, what precipitates violent political crises are the approach to contestation for political power and the winner-takes-all nature of the holding and exercise of government power. Similarly, peace agreements unravel or face the risk of unraveling, forcing post-conflict countries to relapse back to conflict as a result of disagreements over representation and sharing of government power. From these various past and contemporary experiences of conflict and the related peacemaking efforts on the continent, one of the most recurring or common issue is how to overcome the divisions, animosity, and lack of trust among various groups and their constituencies, and achieve an inclusive system of governance and arrangements for representation of all significant political forces equitably in government. Thus, for countries facing conflict or those coming out of conflict, the pursuit of national reconciliation and cohesion is a critical avenue for silencing the doubts. The AU Assembly decision of 31 January 2014 declared 2014 to 2024 the Madiba Nelson Mandela Decade of Reconciliation in Africa. Member states are encouraged to take appropriate measures to promote reconciliation as a means of securing peace, stability, and development in Africa. Within this framework, the AU Peace and Security Council held numerous sessions dedicated to this theme of peace, justice, and reconciliation. Perhaps the various efforts culminated in two landmark instruments adopted during the past 2 years. The first one is the AU Assembly adopted the African Union Transitional Justice Policy in February 2019. As the AU Commission Chairperson, Musa Faki Mohammed, highlighted in the preface to the AU Transitional Justice Policy, the policy covers both redistributive and restorative elements of justice. The policy was adopted after the African Commission on Human and People's Rights adopted a landmark study on transitional justice and human and people's rights in Africa. Together, these two normative documents present a conception of transitional justice reflective of the richness of the norms and transitional justice experiences on the African continent. Although these documents draw on useful contributions from the world, they have also added based from the rich experiences of the continent and the diverse normative instruments. I would like to mention a couple of points here. First, these complementary instruments advance a conception of transitional justice that facilitate fair institutional, social, and economic systems of governance and inclusive development. They enjoin societies in transition to balance the use of backward-looking measures, which emphasize punishment, with forward-looking ones that help transform victims and perpetrators into law-abiding citizens. Second, These two instruments highlight restorative justice approach, emphasizing conciliation, community participation, and restitution, healing and restoration of broken social and institutional relationships, as well as bonds of community among individual members of society. Third, drawing on the lessons from various experiences, including, for example, South Africa, they envisage, this is crucial, transitional justice approach that also focus on the socio-economic rights dimension of structural violence, which precipitates physical violence on the African continent. So emphasis is put on the need to address economic, social, and cultural rights violations, historical and structural inequalities, and issues of sustainable development. End of quote. Additionally, it's not that the various, it also calls on member states, of course, to address two important dimensions. One relates to the vast majority of the youth on the African continent and the opportunities that is required to be created for the African youth for achieving an inclusive society on the African continent and preventing the youth bulge on the African continent from becoming a burden and from becoming a source of insecurity. The second and most important is the gender dimension of conflict, violence, and insecurity on the African continent, as has been pointed out during the earlier session. From all of these, I think it's important to indicate that we have all noted, for example, in the course of the past couple of days that Africa made notable strides, registering a strong economic growth. With the arrival of COVID-19 and the fallout from COVID-19 response measures, the fragilities of countries on the continent has become evident. Tens, if not hundreds of millions of Africans have no access to water and sanitation. Most live in highly congested neighborhoods. There are many without shelter and access to basic health care. All of these are conditions that strip people of their basic socioeconomic rights, hence their dignity as human beings. The nature of the model of economic development that has the support of the global financial and economic system has been such that heavy public investment in socioeconomic rights, including access to water, sanitation, basic health care, shelter, and education, has been unprofitable. The lack of attention to and the concomitant push towards commodification of socioeconomic rights has today created a situation in which, I quote, "We are only as strong as the weakest health system," in the words of Secretary General Guterres. This wrong has to be righted. And this necessitates affirming that socioeconomic rights are fundamental rights, that the right to health is a fundamental right whose protection for all is a national and global public good, hence in the interest of all of humanity. Doing so is not only a smart policy, but also a human rights necessity, for which governments nationally and the international community bear responsibility.
Dr. Solomon.
1 minute, I'm concluding.
Thank you very much, thank you.
1 minute. This is also an opportunity for redefining priorities. Much of the focus of the practice and discourse on peace and security and transitional justice is on physical security and physical violence. Such focus is for sure necessary, yet it is utterly inadequate. The message from COVID-19 is we have to go back to basics. We need to address structural violence resulting from social and economic inequalities and discrimination. We therefore need to bring social policy and investment in social services to the center of AU and UN policy processes. Similarly, we need to also give as much support and attention to socioeconomic justice, with particular focus on the most vulnerable in our approach to transitional justice. This is the surest way to limit our weakness and put the preparedness of our societies and the world for the next pandemic on solid foundations. I thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so very much, Dr. Solomon. I'm sorry for the interruption. I was so absorbed in what you were saying that I completely forgot about the time element. But really, thank you so much for your very stimulating, comprehensive, and rather fresh approach to the issue of peace and reconciliation in Africa. Thank you so very much, Dr. Solomon. Maybe we can come back to you later on, particularly concerning the issue of how do you really promote that culture of peace? And as somebody from the AU, but somebody who also is grounded on national affairs, I'd be very much interested to hear from you your views on how we can promote the culture of peace. And I do hope that our next discussant, Mr. Vasu Gundan, did I pronounce you correctly? Hello?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, yes. It's really a pleasure to introduce you, Mr. Vas Gundan. I have Googled you, and you have really a wealth of experience when it comes to peace negotiations, having worked with the likes of President Mandela and President Zuma, among other things. We really have a distinguished and experienced person on the issue of peace, Mr. Vasu Gundan, who is the Executive Director of the African Center for the Constructive Resolution of Disputes, ACCORD. Is it ACCORD like in French or accord?
Accord with a D.
With a D, okay. So it's for you now, Mr. Gundan. Please go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's a pleasure to be here. And firstly, let me take the opportunity to congratulate and thank Undersecretary General and the Special Advisor on Africa, our sister Biens Ganawas, for making this Africa Dialogue series again a reality, and very richly so with the people that have been speaking. Now, Chair, I want to answer the question that you have posed about what exactly can we do to build peace, tolerance, and reconciliation in the continent. And let me start by saying, I think historically, if we have to look at our continent, this is probably one of the greatest challenges that we will face as a continent. Why? Because firstly, we have never had so many people on the continent in history. We have exponential population growth and a huge population growing at an exponential rate. That is the first issue. The second is that we have, for the first time, have such a huge urbanized population, large concentrations of people in our urban areas. And this is what makes COVID-19 so dangerous for our continent. Hence, all of the measures that we have seen taking place in other parts of the world become extremely difficult to implement here on the continent in terms of social distancing. As Solomon correctly pointed out, if we're talking about washing hands where people don't have water, etc. So the issue of peace, tolerance, and reconciliation is seriously under threat. And I'll outline why I think they are under threat and what can be done and why we need to do them urgently. So the first issue, Chair, is that we have, since 6 weeks ago, when COVID-19 entered the continent, we as an organization have started tracking conflicts in all the countries on the continent. So we have set up about 15 researchers, and we have been tracking conflicts on 7 categories. What are those categories? They're stigmatization and discrimination, trust between citizens and institutions, livelihood insecurity and its economic impact, domestic and gender-based violence, criminal-related incidents, political unrest or violence, and then cross-border or interstate tensions. And we have been plotting this on an instrument and coming out with analysis from there and producing on a weekly basis the COVID-19 Conflict and Resilience Monitor. Many of you might have seen it. The 5th issue was published on Wednesday. Now, what did we find during this time? We found that particularly social and political conflict has actually decreased on the continent. Secondly, crime has also decreased on the continent. However, we have seen, for example, gender-based violence and domestic crime sharply increase, not just in Africa, but across the world. We're talking about in Europe and the US and elsewhere, the numbers are around 30–40% increase in domestic violence, and similar figures across our continent as well. In terms of conflict, we have seen a rise in insurgency across the continent, and this is another worrying factor for us. But why has conflict decreased? Why has social and political conflict decreased? And why has criminal violence decreased? Simply because the measures taken to stem the spread of the virus, lockdowns, curfews, etc., have actually put a lid on conflict. Now, that is a very, very dangerous thing, simply because the virus is not in and of itself going to create conflict on the continent. But what the virus has become is a conflict multiplier. Why has it become a conflict multiplier? Because of the social and economic dislocation that has resulted from the measures taken to stem the spread of the virus. So what are we seeing? With the economic dislocation, you are going to see huge number of bankruptcy of small and medium-sized enterprises, large enterprises, and the disruption of the informal sector, which generates huge amount of employment and income and livelihoods for people on the continent. We are going to see large numbers of unemployed people. Couple that with already the fact that we've had poverty, unemployment, and inequality as the triple challenges that has faced us as a continent. So with the economic and social dislocation that has come and the lid that we have put on conflict, immediately that lid is lifted. And here in South Africa, this week, by the end of this week or next week, we go into what is called level 3, which opens up more of the economy and lifts the lid again slightly, and then you will start to see social and political conflict. We have been tracking, as I said, and we have found that in about 10 countries on the continent, including my own country, South Africa, we will begin to see a rise in social and political conflict. So that's the first major threat that we will face as a continent. The second that threatens peace, tolerance, and reconciliation is the fact that globally, we are seeing a slight shift, not a slight shift, in fact, a rapid shift. And you'll see there's a lot of literature. In fact, it's the major debate today about what the new world order post-COVID will look like, not even post-COVID, post-lockdown will look like, and what will be the ideological foundations of that new world order. And what we have been seeing, even pre-COVID, is a move towards authoritarianism across the world. Couple that with closing up of borders, states of emergencies, etc., that bring into being a greater sense of nationalism amongst countries. And then, of course, what you see coming with the rise of social conflict and political conflict is this question of populism. So if you take the social and political conflict that is coming, and then you take the rise in authoritarianism, nationalism and populism, because as governments have now gone and imposed states of emergencies, brought out the military and the police, rightly so, to deal with the spread of the virus and to manage law and order. But as the lid is lifted and we have more social and political conflict, there is going to be even more reason that governments are going to say they need to keep these measures in place. This is going to put citizens in conflict with their governments as rights have been or maybe abrogated, abused, etc. So if you look at the last monitor, the president of ECOWAS, Bro, and the UN SRSG for West Africa, Chambas, have both written in our monitor saying we have to watch the abuse of human rights on the continent. Carlos Lopez has written in the monitor talking about the fact that whereas the rest of the world will go into recession, large parts of Africa are going to go into depression. So what then do we do now? Because we know that peace and tolerance and reconciliation are going to be threatened. Three things that we have to do, Chair. The first is we need to immediately begin to strengthen social compacts between governments, private sector, and civil society. And how do we bring at a national level all of these three sectors together? And we begin to build ambassadors for peace, religious leaders, traditional leaders, academics, former ministers, former presidents, people who have gravitas, who have credibility, who can go into communities and preach tolerance and reconciliation, because there's going to be many, many people, populists and others, who are going to preach the language that you have been warning about, Chair. So that's the first thing nationally that we have to do. The second is we have to strengthen multilateralism. We have to strengthen our African Union. We have to strengthen our regional organizations, all of the RECs. And in that context, we have to strengthen the United Nations and all of our multilateral institutions, because our multilateral institutions have proved in this crisis that they can be robust. And lastly, of course, we have to strengthen global solidarity, because as we respect that every country has a right to pursue its national interest, it has to pursue that national interest through global responsibility. Thank you, Chair. The Chair is muted. Chair, I think you are muted.
All right.
Yeah, now you are. Okay.
Okay. Look, I've been advised by the organizers that that we may have to bring this session to an end very, very quickly, very soon. Is that right, Mr. Tamrat?
We have
you are under time pressure as well.
We have to, just a reminder, until we have time until 11:40. So just to bear that in mind and to give people an opportunity to pose questions and interact. That's all.
Thank you. 11:40 means what now? How many minutes from here on?
Another 40 minutes. Sorry.
Oh, another 40 minutes.
Yes, we do have time. Yeah.
Oh, I see. I'm so sorry. It's because we're in different time zones, and and I was a little bit okay. My goodness, that's very nice. That's very good. I was a little bit apprehensive, you know, about stopping people and so on. Okay, Moses, you're with Lol Mayem, right? Am I correct?
That is correct.
Yes, and you are from the Janub Games, right?
That is correct.
Now, why don't I ask you to introduce yourself, Moses, since you are replacing your colleague, your other friend. Moses, please go ahead, introduce yourself, and share with us your thoughts through sports, I suppose, and such other things, a culture of peace in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Asifa. And I'd like to first, start off by, of course, thanking the Undersecretary General, Ms. Gowanas, as well as Special Advisor on Africa, for one, just organizing such an important dialogue, with the theme of COVID-19 and silencing the guns, the challenges and opportunities. I think it's more important than ever that we're having these dialogues. And I would like to second that, allowing me, of course, this platform. And as a youth, of course, right, there's not many youth voices in platforms like this. And I would like to, again, thank you for just allowing me the platform, allowing myself and my CEO, Lual Mayen with Janub Games, who just for correction, he will be also presenting after me here. I'm just doing the intro. So thank you again for just allowing us this platform. And again, I'd like to thank our distinguished guests, our dignitaries, our government officials, and our world viewers across the world here. It's been a great conversation, especially around just strengthening, right, a culture of peace, tolerance, and reconciliation. It's more important than ever currently, right, especially with refugees and within this COVID-19 pandemic and this unprecedented time. Refugees are at risk and at the highest risk, I would say, right? Where now they're having to decide between their Maslow's hierarchy of needs of one, food, safety, shelter, versus actually going out and working and having some type of income, right? Where within these camps, they're all locked down, right? Every 2 seconds, a refugee and or person's displaced in the world, where totaling about 70 million displaced people all over, and then about 26 million refugees. So with that, the plight of refugees, right, is something I think is personally right near and dear to myself and my heart. I'm a former refugee myself from Kakuma. I came to the U.S. when I was 6, so I've been blessed and given these opportunities, one, to escape that situation and be able to be afforded this opportunity to raise in the U.S. and to build upon what's happening here. I would like to echo my fellow global shaper, Hassan Mohammed. He's also a global shaper of the World Economic Forum. He was the co-chair of the 2019 Davos meeting. And with that, his call to action of one, realizing, right, refugees are more than just a number or this stigmatization, right? Demystifying what refugees are. We're humans, right? We're individuals, we're contributors to society and to the world. And, I'm blessed enough to have been given that opportunity to get out of the refugee camp and, be here in this world. And I would just like to echo again the words of Dieng, our head kind of moderated there, that since war begins in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed, right? And with, again, the point of Mr. Asifa saying, what are actual solutions, right, that we can begin to talk about, embark on, and actually provide. And with that, I have the luxury and the opportunity to work with, my talented CEO, Janu Lual Mayen with Janu Games, where he's providing now a solution, right? One, for players and individuals in the world to experience what the journey of refugee is, right? Because I think showing empathy and having empathy for the journey of refugee is where it starts, of understanding who refugees are, what is the journey of them being displaced. And this game allows individuals to experience that. And then with the actual call to action, more than ever, especially with COVID-19, these refugees are in lockdown, right? So the world, or the game itself, Salam, bridges the gap between the virtual world and the real world, where there's actual in-app purchases, where you can buy food, clothing, medicine, and water for the actual refugees in the game. And then that translates into the real world, where we're partnering with UN agencies, NGOs that are kind of coordinating these camps to then distribute those funds to actual real refugees in the world. So again, I would love to call action, right, to these organizations, the AU, UNHCR, all the distinguished speakers and guests here. We would love to have conversations around collaboration of how can we implement that in-app purchases and really give those funds to refugees in those refugee camps. Again, I think, thank you for just allowing me this platform and this time. And I'll just hand it over here to Lual Mayen, my CEO. And again, just, thank you for one, just allowing youth voices on this platform. Because again, I think there's not a lot of youth voices. And with that, just having this opportunity, and we hope to continue to have opportunities like this and work with you guys all collaboratively. But thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Moses. Lowell, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yes, Lowell. I can't see you though.
Can you see me?
No, I cannot. Can you put your video on, please?
Can you see me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead without much ado? Why don't you just go ahead? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. As we talk about, the creative way that we can be able to engage youth in terms of like peace building, in terms of like, conflict resolution. And as Moses mentioned before, as for me, this is something that is personal to me. I'm from South Sudan, and when you look at South Sudan, it's a country that is ripped by civil war. And for us, especially during this time, we need to look at a solution that actually can bring people together. And there's one of the things that I believe a lot, and that's something that is called like true peace is something that is built over time. It is built within people sitting together and be able to to talk about things that are affecting their life. And like living in a refugee camp, I've lived in a refugee camp for more than 22 years in northern Uganda, and living through that experience as a kid that is growing up. Most of the children, they were born in war, they were raised up in war. So their mindset is all about war. Their mindset is all about conflict. So it's really so hard for them. It's really so hard for them to really understand what is actually past war to them. So, and as for me, that as a person that I lived through that experience, I was thinking to myself, and I was like, what is the better solution that we can bring these children together, that we can bring these kids together in Africa and everywhere, so that they can actually understand what true peace is. And I was so lucky enough to start my own company in the refugee camp in northern Uganda. And my company is focusing on making video game for peace and conflict resolution. When you look at video game, there are more than 7 million players. 700 million players right now on instant game, and it's one of the biggest industry that engage youth every time. For example, one of the things I can ask is that video games are very vital tool that we can use to promote peace. They are not like a movie where you sit on your couch and you watch a movie. Whenever you play a video game with your friend, you are making decision. And one of the example is that maybe you have children at home, they are playing, and someone might be playing Fortnite, and one of the things is that like they may be asking their players like, why did you kill me? They don't say that, why did you kill my character? So it become part of your life. So we are using the tool of video game to be able to engage young African, to be able to understand what peace is, what conflict resolution is, and they have stuff that they can be able to talk about. And one of the games we're working on is right now is a board game, because when you go to Africa right now, you see a lot of people playing dominoes. They play cards, and at the end of the day, when they're playing dominoes, they start having conflict as they're playing dominoes, because it is something that brings them together, but they don't really still respect one another. So we are working on a board game. So this is a board game we're working on. It's called Wider. So it's a game that brings people on the table and talk about conflict. For example, the game might be asking you to identify a country that is going on through a conflict, and you actually started, you as a player, you actually starting to bring your own solution to that conflict and how that conflict can be involved. And that through that, people are playing game, they are having fun, they are having fun, but they are still finding solution. And also like the peace is something that is building within them. It's something that is developing, and that's why like I feel like making using different tools, different experiences to be able to help young African to be able to like be engaged in terms of like conflict resolution. It's something very important. Sometimes we dwell a lot on ceasefires, which is very important. When we have the ceasefires, what are the tools that we can be able to engage the youth? What are the tools that we can be able to engage the people on the grassroots, people that really don't have the chance to be able to have dialogue, and they have game to play? So this is something we've been working on. We're working on a Salam game. It's a game that actually put a player in the shoes of a refugee fleeing a country, a war. And a player like we just announced the game, which is coming in the summer at Microsoft Theater, in LA, and we had more than 45 million viewership, at the video game industry. So to look at this, I look at the industry and be able to come together with the private sector. We can be able to see like true peace is something that is going to be more than just signing a ceasefire. So if somebody asks a question for me, like I'm happy to answer. But at the end of the day, this is something really very important to me as a youth, that we have to use different kind of ways that we can be able to bring people together to be able to like discuss conflict and be able to like resolve conflict, and also look at the empathy. And that's something that we're focusing as a company. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lowell. Really, this was extremely interesting. And you have come a long, long way. You've been in a refugee camp for what's 20 plus years. Yeah. Amazing. It's really a very inspiring story. Ladies and gentlemen, we've now come, I think, to the end of the second part of this session, the panelists. Now we have to move to the third part of the session, which is going to the list of registered speakers. If you do have questions, this is to the audience in general. If you do have questions, please send your questions on the chat module. You can send questions to all the panelists, and I'm sure they'll be very happy to respond. Please do that. You are encouraged to do so. Now I have the honor of inviting the Ambassador of Morocco, His Excellency Hilal Omar. Ambassador, to you, please.
Do you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor and giving me this opportunity to say a few words and few comments. My dear Adama Diang, dear brother Adama, distinguished discussion, Excellencies, good morning to you all. At the outset, allow me to thank all the distinguished organizers of the Africa Dialogue Series 2020 for including a session on very important issue, which is the culture of peace, tolerance, and reconciliation in the agenda. This theme is indeed of great importance and value to my country. I seize this opportunity to express my sincere thanks to my brother Adama Diang and to all the distinguished discussants for their thorough briefings that further enlightened us about the importance of promoting human rights, traditional values, social cohesion, tolerance, education for peace and reconciliation in addressing and preventing xenophobia, hate speech, and stigmatization. The Kingdom of Morocco reiterates its unwavering support to the Secretary General's multiple, timely, and transversal appeals that have been a catalyzer in bringing the international community together during these trying times, including, among others, his call for global ceasefire, his appeal to religious leaders to join forces to work for peace around the world, his call to action for human rights, and most recently, his call on hate speech. Due to time constraint, I will focus my intervention on the following 4 points. First, Morocco strongly believes that religious leaders can play an important role in raising the universal awareness of the international community about the multidimensional challenges of COVID-19. The meeting that Morocco organized on May 12 on this very particular point, and which was marked by the distinguished participation of the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, and the PGA, Mr. Tijani Banda Mohammed, as well as the intervention of eminent religious leaders from the 3 religions and senior principals, UN principles, resonated worldwide and highlighted shared views and beliefs that religious leaders indeed have the ability to galvanize international consciousness and collective responsibility, not only to fight the pandemic, but also to share common vision and unifying messages of coexistence, tolerance, and reconciliation. Second, my delegation is strongly concerned with the surge of hate speech incidents during this crisis. Unfortunately, individuals belonging to racial, ethnic, and religious groups are being wrongfully vilified and accused of spreading the virus. Third, allow me to highlight that this serious health crisis is exacerbating already existing threats to security in Africa. In fact, among rising issues that could threaten peace and security in the continent are the disruption of ongoing mediation efforts and the interruption of peace agreements and implementation that are still ongoing, and the incapacity of swift reaction and response. Finally, allow me to conclude by reiterating that the COVID-19 pandemic has emphasized the importance of combining peace, security, social, economic, health, and environmental priorities. Therefore, Morocco is totally convinced that the response to COVID-19 crisis should be based on multilateralism and inclusion and inclusive approach. No country can by itself win the battle against the pandemic, but all of us united, we can. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you so much. Again, as I said earlier, those of you who may have questions, you can send them to the panelists by using the chat mode on your screen. Mr. Tamrat or Ben, do you have questions from? Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Okay. In that case, then I would like to invite His Excellency Ambassador Ali Kaba of Sierra Leone. Ambassador, are you there? I thought yes, you are there.
Yes.
Go ahead, Ambassador. Welcome. A warm welcome to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Excellencies, lead presenter, discussants, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for giving me the floor to share my delegation's views on the theme of the African Dialogue Series, COVID-19 and Silencing the Guns in Africa, Challenges and Opportunities 2020, and especially on the topic for this session, strengthening the culture of peace, tolerance, and reconciliation, which is very apt in achieving the peaceful, stable, and prosperous Africa that we want. At the outset, let me thank the Office of the Special Advisor, especially USG donors, and the African Union Observer Mission under the dynamic leadership of Ambassador Fatima Mohammed for organizing this successful informative event. Research has shown that violent conflicts in Africa are driven by poverty, economic hardship, violation of human rights, exclusion, inequalities, and marginalization of certain sections of the society, to name a few. Undoubtedly, these challenges can be overcome as long as the correct remedies are identified and applied. Mr. Moderator, the African Union Master Roadmap of Practical Steps to Silence the Guns in Africa by the year 2020 requests AU member states to engage and encourage political stakeholders to foster conducive conditions that contribute to the preservation of peace, security, stability, and cohesion, and further encourages the leadership of our respective countries to use Agenda 2063 as a guide for elaboration. In view of this, and given our specific experience after 11 years of a civil war, 20 years ago, I am pleased to state that the government of Sierra Leone, under the leadership of His Excellency President Julius Maada Bio, embedded the AU Agenda 2063 and the 2030 Agenda into our National Development Plan for the period 2019 to 2023. This, in effect, means that in implementing our National Development Plan, Sierra Leone is effectively implementing the AU 2063 Agenda. Furthermore, the government of Sierra Leone has held community and local consultations to develop a roadmap of long-term peace. The government has also developed a green paper which articulates the architecture of peace in Sierra Leone. In this regard, a national dialogue was held in May last year that provided an overview of the country's long-term path to peace and stability. Despite the current challenges resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic, It is hoped that a Commission on Peace and National Cohesion will be set up very soon, running in not too distant future, in order to actualize the aims and objectives of the national dialogue. In addition, just yesterday, Mr. Moderator, His Excellency President Julius Maada Bio engaged leaders of civil society organizations on the COVID-19 pandemic and other emerging issues in the country. And we say this because it's very vital for us to make sure that in talking about the culture of peace, we need to make sure that civil society is fully engaged in this effort. In conclusion, the challenges that African countries face are further exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, not just in Sierra Leone, but across the continent, which has the tendency to induce tensions and possibly further undermine peace and security in Africa, as some of the presenters already highlighted, especially the colleague from South Africa. It goes without saying that more than ever before, African countries have to come together to collaborate and fight against the spread of this pandemic, while at the same time ensuring the full implementation of the AU roadmap to silence the guns in Africa. In order to achieve our collective and individual aspirations, we shall continue to have a platform such as this to share experiences, provide innovative ideas, and to also create the appropriate institutions and mechanisms to further enhance collaboration in support of our efforts. Je vous remercie. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Excellency. Thank you. Well, we have to move a little bit fast. There is a question from the participants. It's a question to Mr. Loal and Moses, and that is, what is the reach of your games in refugee camps, especially through Facebook?
Yeah, I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
I'll add just a little bit, and then I'll let Law go. But initially, how Law basically he started the first version of Salam, and that got thousands on thousands of downloads through Facebook, and it was a Bluetooth-enabled game, and that's how Law got discovered by the gaming industry. And then he's working on the second version here, and then I'll allow him to maybe add on to that.
To the refugees. So the main thing is
very briefly, please. Very briefly, please. Thank you.
So we have like over 700 million players on instant game. So the idea is that most people that do not have access to mobile phone in a refugee camp, we're going to be like having like a center where they can be able to play the game. So but people that have access to instant game, they can be able to like play the game. That's why the game is instant. So you play it on any device, and it's not heavy. It's not like a heavy game as well. So yeah, I think so that if that helped, yeah.
Maybe just to add on there, the partnership that we have is with Facebook, where we have access to 700 million active users on the instant games platform. So that's where it will be launched here in the summer about 2020. So.
Thank you very, very much. May I take advantage of my role as moderator and pose some questions to the panelists? I thought there were a couple of issues which have enormous potential in terms of promoting peace and tolerance, which we may not have touched on. And let me sort of pose them to all four participants. I suspect Mr. Dieng is gone, so I don't think we can benefit from his wisdom. But let me ask this. Let me just pose my questions. Under Secretary General Gawanas, when she opened this conference on Wednesday, she made, I think, a very important reflective observation, which was that peace is not really the absence of war. And this remark, I think, is extremely important. And it was anticipated early on in the 18th century by the famous Dutch philosopher Spinoza. And I have a quote from him who said, "Peace is not the absence of war. It is a virtue, a state of mind, a disposition for benevolence and justice." Now, therefore, the way we look at the world, the way we look at others, at women, at girls, whether or not we resolve issues through dialogue or through the exercise of authority and power is very important. And that begins at the family level, at the community level, in many ways. Our views and attitudes are formed by our experiences within the family, within communities. Whether, for example, our father believes in a conversation around the dinner table, or in an exposition of his views on the world, on gender, and so on and so forth. How he views or treats his wife, or how he views and treats the girls vis-a-vis the boys, whether or not they have a voice. All these things have a bearing, I think, on our view of dialogue or authority, our views on human rights, and so on. And this, I believe, has an impact on generations and generations and generations of people. And that may very well be why we have these big as well as little monsters on the political arena, in the form of a Bokassa or an Idi Amin, those being the extreme ones. But you have little monsters, at the level of the community anyway. So I was just wondering if we may not really have missed something by way of ignoring the central role of families in public policy. That is one. The second is on the role of law. The law is often viewed, I think, by many of us as the business of lawyers. And yet that shouldn't be the case. The law is everybody's business. Our attitude towards the law, the role of the law, and how much importance we give to law is extremely important, I think, in our view of a constitutional order, in our way of dealing with tensions and so on. Let me just give you a very simple example. The coronavirus created a political and a constitutional crisis in this country, in Ethiopia. The Electoral Commission decided that they could not run the election within a period of 2-3 months because of the coronavirus, and this coincided with the assumption of a new government, the installment of a new government in power. But the Constitution had nothing to say on that. But the interesting thing, the good side to that, is that it generated considerable interest and dialogue on the role of the Constitution in resolving political disputes. And for the first time in my lifetime, the Constitution became a central part of the national and the political discourse. And therefore, I think educating the public about the role of the law, even when it is infringed, even when it is ignored, is, I think, a very important thing. And this may be something on which Dr. Ayalo and my friend Gundan, I think, may have something to say. So I just throw that to you, and I'd like to listen to what you have to say. Thank you.
I can comment if you want.
Please go.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're quite right. Our brother Adama, when he started, he quoted Archibald MacLeish on UNESCO, since war is born in the minds of men. That is a very, very powerful statement. And therefore, we must build the ramparts of peace in the minds of men. And where do we build these ramparts of peace? We actually build it in the minds of young children. And who does that? Is the parents of those children. So, yes, I think you are quite right that we have to talk about the role of the family when it comes to peace and when it comes to, as you put it, the role of the family in public policy is very, very important. And therefore, we have to strengthen the role of the family. But, you know, when you have someone like Lual, who is in a refugee camp, who is the father and who is the mother that is going to shape the minds of these young people who are in our refugee camps? This is very, very important because, you know, because I can see, Chair, these are matters that are occupying your mind. And as you know very well, there is the question of nurture and nature. And these are the two things, because it is also the environment, the social environment, which is the refugee camp or the community. It is the family environment. So I think those are the two things I have to say on that. But the second question, since I'm a lawyer, I think you posed it to me. This is a very, very challenging question today. And we have had discussions with our colleagues in the Rex. In fact, we have just asked the former judge president of Lesotho to write in the Monitor on this specific question of the role of constitutions and the role of electoral laws and its implications in relation to the current environment of COVID-19. We are going to see constitutionalism and the law being tested every single day, and we have to be involved as a general public. As you correctly point out, law is not for the lawyers. Law is about your rights, but also your responsibilities. So, and I think if we are going to see that a society where we all have our rights respected, we also have to exercise in that context our responsibilities. Thank you, Chair.
May I say something, Chair? I'm from UNESCO. May I comment very quickly?
Mr. Ayalo, I think Dr. Solomon, I think wanted to say something, and then Mr. Motoko, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
The first dimension of your question, I think, obviously the building of a culture of peace is a result of a number of various factors. You mentioned the role that the family plays, but we also have the role of the community, the role of social institutions, be it religious institutions, educational institutions, cultural institutions. All of these have a very critical role to play in terms of nurturing the kind of human being, the kind of social relations that build and also make social relationships peaceful and also fulfilling. You also have, obviously, the role of the state. I think that one is very critical simply because politics has the effect of setting the tone on how relations at different levels are going to be shaped. So when you have a very bad politics, unfortunately, the tendency is that it can poison the relationships at different levels, including in the household, as it tends to divide and raise one brothers and sisters against each other. So I think the centrality of the kind of politics that we have matters a great deal. That is why it is imperative for us to insist that having peaceful political processes that are guided by compromise, give and take, the art of politics, basically the essence of it. I think the central problem that we face today is basically that those in a position of power are not willing in any way to include those outside of power. And therefore, they force those outside of power to do everything that they can to throw away those in a position of power. We have to get out of this logic. Unless we get out of this logic of politics, I think it's extremely difficult for us to get out. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Solomon. Mr. Motoko, I'm being rushed by the organizers. We have to stop within a minute, please. Please go ahead, Mr. Motoko.
Half a minute. You said something very important, but when you introduced me, you speak about some indigenous foundation of the culture of peace. And when you speak about family, it's exactly this one. We don't forget that we have our local values, practices for building peace in Africa. We tend to often to forget, and thus we should go into education. And then lastly, the political will. How do we avoid the monsters? Can we train our leaders to be actually promoters of culture of peace? And that's something that we should explore. Training of leaders, of African leaders, so we can avoid the monsters that you mentioned in your intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm being harangued and harassed by the audience participants who have come with lots of questions. My friends, please bear with us because we're running short of time. And we can't possibly, address all the questions that you have sent us. But let me just select one question, okay, to all the participants. And can you do it within half a minute, let's say? And this is this interesting question, which is African civilization part of the solution in fighting COVID-19 and silencing the guns? It's a heavy question. I don't understand the question, but maybe you can give me some answers. Thank you.
Chair, I saw the question there. Let me just, maybe there was another part that the person asked, and that was whether the silencing the guns theme by the African Union is realistic. I think just to paraphrase what he said. And I have to say, yes, it is, because it was not about silencing the guns and stopping the guns by 2020. It was rather to raise the profile of this issue. And yes, we have as a continent successfully done that. It is now in the psyche of everybody. It is now addressed by everybody. He also talked about Africa not producing guns. And last year, together with Ambassador Lamamra, the then special envoy on silencing the guns, he still is, and myself, we both addressed the UN Security Council. And I made the point there that it was very easy to silence the guns. Just stop producing them. And it is not Africa producing them. It was, yes, the P5 members who are sitting in the UN Security Council, they produce the weapons. So stop producing the weapons and we'll silence the guns. Thank you very much.
How about the machetes?
How about the machetes, you mean?
Yes.
Yes, this is very true.
The heart and the mind is important, isn't it?
It's very true, Dr. Asifa. Think about the machetes that were used in Rwanda and see where they were produced and where they were shipped from.
Oh, we have local weapons, Mazu. We have local weapons in Africa and many ways of fighting without using the weapons from the Western countries.
This is also look at that. This is also true. Solomon, I agree with you.
No. Okay. All right. Anybody else would like to sort of? Okay, we're done, I believe. Mr. Tamrat, I think we're done. This has been a very lively discussion. Thank you so very, very much. And I pass the microphone to Mr. Tamrat now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Asifa. It was really a very interesting and lively discussion. I wish we had more time for this because really we haven't spoken about the role of education, for example, in shaping the minds of young people. And there's so much more that needs to be done in terms of inculcating in the minds of young people the sense of responsibility, civic responsibility, and all those things. But this is, I think, a lot of food for thought was shared with us. And thank you very much for your able leadership. So this will bring to an end the the 7 moderated sessions that we had. I think all of you agree this has been very interesting, and it gives us more ideas for issues to focus on. Now we will move to the closing session, but we would like to take about a 5-minute break before we do so. So it's a very brief, intermission, but then we will resume very soon, very quickly. So please don't go away. Stay with us. Thank you. You can switch off your microphones and cameras for the few minutes. Thank you.
Morning, Mr. Tamara. This is the Ambassador Hosha from Cabo Verde speaking.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good to see you. We will we expect people to come back soon, so we'll be starting fairly soon. Adama, I will the floor is for you to. I'm glad you're back with us before we go to the closing session. Mike. So, ladies and gentlemen, we should now move to the closing session. I hope you are back and following us. I would, before moving to the two speakers for the closing session, I would like to ask Mr. Adama Dieng, since he's back with us, to perhaps take a couple of minutes to share with us closing thoughts on from the previous session, which was really very, very rich and insightful. Thank you very much. Your floor is yours. Just unmute your microphone, Adama. No, we don't hear you. Your microphone shows it's muted. Is it unmuted from your side? Just look at the button. You have the microphone sign at the bottom bar on the left side. If you can unmute that, if you can. Colleagues, okay. They're advising that you log out and come back and log in again. I think sometimes the system requires needs to do that. So reboot, and in I take you a couple of minutes. And apologies everyone for this slight delay. Okay, I see you now. Is your mic on?
You hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you, please.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll be extremely brief, simply as a way to say that I feel really sorry not having had the opportunity to the discussion, particularly my colleague from UNESCO, was we're focusing on, my presentation was focusing mainly, I would say, on how to counter and address hate speech. And as you may know, just about a week ago, we had a virtual conference of experts, some of them coming from Africa, to prepare the Global Ministerial Conference on Education to Prevention, with a focus on hate speech. And I'm glad just when you were concluding, you put a lot of emphasis on education, because at the end of the day, we need to invest more and more on education to prevention. And if you go back to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, you will see that we had, at the time of the drafting of that instrument, insisted a lot on the solidarity rights, on the economic and social rights. And I should say that education was one of the key rights we emphasized, as well as right to health. But when you see the way, how much did we invest? Some of our countries did invest, of course, a lot on education, others not. And that's one of the reasons I have been arguing that today, more than ever, African countries should invest on education, invest on new technology, invest on health. I mean, instead of investing on military equipment, on weaponry, no, let's invest in those areas. And at the end of the day, the more you have your population educated, the better you will really fulfill even the enjoyment of human rights. And when I see, for instance, the importance of the African Court on Human Rights, and I seize this opportunity to congratulate them, but at the same time, we are seeing some government which has accepted to make the declaration allowing individuals, non-governmental organizations to seize the African Court. I applauded that decision. But recently, we have seen government withdrawing simply because they were not pleased with the decision rendered by the court. And to me, these are issues we need to look into, because you cannot simply say that you accept a jurisdiction, a court, when they render a decision which pleases you. So these are issues we need to think about. Does it mean that, like people were arguing in the past, that human rights are, when you speak about human rights, this is not about the justice? And we say, no, look, the idea of an African court was launched in 1960 from Lagos. It took until recently it was put in place. And I can say that Africa can be proud, having contributed to the development of international law in many areas. But what we need is to match our words with deeds. And I think that is where we need to have a very open discussion. Judges are human beings, they can make a mistake, but let's address these issues and simply accept the primacy of the rule of law. Once again, thank you very much, and congratulations to USG Bians and to your team. You have made such wonderful work in such a short time to really bring the world around the table and to discuss about Africa and how we can more and more make Africa being the continent from where we will see emerging really the most, I would say, respected institutions. Because what I am saying is clear. Africa is the continent of the present, it is the continent of the future. There is no surprise that everybody is jumping to Africa. It's not because we are beautiful, it's not because we have beautiful lands, but it is because we have all the resources. And those resources start with the human resources.
Africa has the most talented people. Use those people effectively. Make sure that the rule of law is also respected, respect human rights, and at the end of the day, you will see less people leaving the country, seeking refuge elsewhere, leaving the continent to see greener pasturage elsewhere, because everything is in Africa, the cradle of humanity. And I thank you once again, Tamrat.
Thank you very much, Adama, for those very concise but also very precise ideas that you shared with us. Thank you very much. We now move to the conclusion of this program. We will have two remarks to be made. The first one will be by His Excellency Mr. José Luis Rocha, permanent representative of Cabo Verde to the United Nations, and he's also the chairperson of the African Group for the month of May. And so, Ambassador, without any further ado, I give you the floor. Thank you very much for joining us. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Do you listen to me? Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Tamarat. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor for me to present these closing remarks as chair of the African Group in New York for the month of May. The African Group plays a key role in the nexus African Union and member states with the UN in New York. I wanted to thank each one of you for making the Africa Dialogue Series 2020 possible. The Africa Dialogue Series became an annual event providing a platform for in-depth discussion on current issues and trends on the African continent. I commend Madame USG Gowanus and her entire team for organizing this landmark event. Over the course of the last 3 days, we have covered a broad number of issues with a focus on the African Union's theme of the year, silencing guns, and at the same time highlighting the reality of Africa and indeed of the world battling with the COVID-19 global health challenge and its economic and social implications. While Africa is racing against time to avoid the armed conflicts in the continent, the pandemic has shown us the importance of being prepared when crisis hits. By not being prepared for such a crisis, we are even less prepared for the looming consequences of ongoing and worsening challenge. It has also shown us that postponing bold decisions can have huge costs. It is clear that there are potential devastating impacts on Africa on many frontiers, as there are also many opportunities we can harness to prepare ourselves for a better future, bearing in mind the diversity of the different member states and, therefore, the need to adapt solutions to each of one in particular. For example, I myself come from a peaceful, small island, middle-income state in Africa, whose remoteness, size, and exposure to extreme events like drought challenge us quite differently when compared to many other countries, landlocked states, countries currently fighting terrorism or other extreme events. The fact is that we must put on broad lens the continent in all its diversity and avoid one-size-fits-all solutions to our various challenges. The same goes for the opportunities, which are in abundance and deserve more focus on harnessing. Excellencies, at this juncture, I'd like to highlight a few key points that we went through over the past few days. First, given the challenge that many African countries face with their health system, the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic on the public health, peace, and security of the continent are dire, particularly in post-conflict countries, as well as those experiencing protracted conflicts. The African Union has expressed concerns about the likelihood of the COVID-19 pandemic, affecting negatively on the continent's stability. The African Union Peace and Security Council noted that the COVID-19 outbreak is a public health emergency that could constitute a threat to peace and security on the continent. The African leadership on the continent is not saving efforts in addressing this challenge, particularly in ensuring that the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention is fit to provide technical support to ensure that African countries take into account all COVID-19 mitigation response to address its adverse effects on populations already facing severe socioeconomic challenges. These efforts also include measures to address inequality and ensure equitable and sustainable access to quality healthcare facilities and treatment. Second, young people are at the forefront of the combating COVID-19 misinformation, discrimination, and stigma related to the crisis, as well as disseminating positive message to public concerning the importance of physical distancing and proper measures to stop the spread of the virus. In Africa and globally, young people are volunteering to promote the World Health Organization guidelines and addressing the COVID-19 related needs of the most vulnerable in their communities. Efforts to mitigate the short and long-term impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic require an unprecedented level of collaboration. Young people should be able to actively participate in shaping responses and need to be meaningfully included in all aspects and phases of the response. Third, as for other global challenges, the most efficient solutions are always those leveraging everyone's collective strength and contributions. There is a need to find innovative ways to mitigate the risk that physical distancing poses on social justice and inclusion, as well as safeguarding the human rights of groups who are at risk. We need to be mindful of people who are marginalized or vulnerable, including rural people, migrants, refugees, adolescent girls and young women, indigenous people, persons with disabilities, people living with HIV. Fourth, we have all agreed on the importance of partnership, global cooperation, comprehensive and coordinated response are important ways and means of successfully tackling the coronavirus pandemic and addressing the challenges to long-term sustainable peace. We must continue to ensure that we push back on the threats to multilateralism and focus on the strengthening of international institutions and organizations. Here, I must commend the UN leadership in general and the WHO in particular for its tireless efforts. Lastly, it has been widely reported that the present situation requires focused, efficient, and proven measures for economies in need to address the impact of the pandemic on health, on the economic and social fabric, on employment, for all workers in the informal and formal sectors, in companies, and especially in small and medium-sized enterprises. Wherever possible, external support from organizations such as International Monetary Fund, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, the G7, the G20, the World Bank, and regional banks will be indispensable. In conclusion, I wanted to say that in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, national responses are vital. But in the medium term, international collaboration and cooperation will be our best weapon. In addition, reforming and reinforcing the multilateral institutions and mechanisms that underpin such cooperation will be our best defense against future global threats. The pandemic has lowered difference and united us through our common humanity. We are all in this together. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. In such a short statement, you have covered so much ground, and it's really heartening to hear the views of member states and the commitment you express to multilateralism and multilateral organizations in this era of a common challenge and a common threat to the entire human race. And your emphasis on Africa's own responsibility, but the importance of global solidarity is really well taken. So thank you very much, Ambassador, for those comments. I would now like to give the floor to Undersecretary General Beans Gawanas, Special Advisor on Africa at the United Nations, to give us closing remarks. Beans, please.
To get to a view. Sorry.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Vince, the floor is yours.
Ambassador of Cape Verde and Chair of the Africa Group, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I can't believe that we have come to the end of 3 half days of discussions, of contributions, and that despite all the hiccups that we have, at least it was not that major to have disrupted the flow of communication amongst us. I would like to start by thanking all of you for your contributions on the 3rd edition of the Africa Dialogue Series. May I give a special word of thanks to the speakers at the opening session, to the moderators, the presenters, the panelists, and the discussants, as well as those that took the floor. I want to thank our co-organizers, but also in particular, the AU Ambassador, Fatima Mohammed, that walked with us this journey. While this may be the third time that OSAA is organizing the Africa Dialogue Series in this format, it is the first time ever in the virtual space, not only for OSAA, but almost for the whole UN Secretariat, I believe. 2.5 years ago, my office launched the ADS with 2 main objectives: to promote policy discussions on issues of critical relevance to Africa, and to ensure that Africa is high on the agenda of the United Nations. After these 3 half days of the ADS, I think we can say that we have succeeded. Thanks to your contributions, we held insightful discussions on silencing the guns and the fight against COVID-19 pandemic. In this regard, I would like to thank member states, African institutions, and UN entities for their participation in this series. And I would like to convey my special gratitude to the civil society representatives and the scholars that have taken the floor and have participated during these 3 half days. As I said before, governance is not about structures, but it is about people. And to listen to the people, we need to bring in civil society. I would therefore like to reiterate OSA's commitment to continue serving as a platform, bringing together civil society, policy, and decision makers together. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in my welcome remarks, I noted that the goal of the ADS was to come up with actionable recommendations on the way forward. These recommendations will be developed in detail in the report that my office will produce, but allow me to highlight some of the points made. It is critical to bridge the generational gap and to promote inclusive leadership through leveraging the knowledge and expertise of all segments of the population, and strengthening youth participation in decision making. It is imperative to develop a new paradigm towards the way we do business, manage our health systems, and improve livelihoods. The new paradigm requires significant investment in education and skills development. In addition, investments also in health, in water and sanitation, social protection, employment, and sustainable infrastructure. Sustainability should be factored into planning processes. The pandemic has a profound impact on the implementation of plans and strategies at all levels, as well as implementation of important initiatives such as silencing the guns. International solidarity and action are required to strengthen Africa's health systems, maintain food supplies, avoid a financial crisis, support education, protect jobs, keep households and businesses afloat, as well as cushion the continent against lost income and export earnings. A comprehensive debt framework is needed, starting with an across-the-board debt standstill for countries unable to serve their debt. The international community should support African efforts in fighting COVID-19 through the CDC-led continent-wide pooled procurement and by scaling up capacity for local manufacturing of key commodities, providing support on logistics of distribution of medical supplies, engaging private sector to supplement government response capacity, and deploying and scaling up the use of technology and innovation. There is a need for rapid implementation of the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement to secure a leveling playing field for Africa's poor and marginalized groups. It is imperative to simplify the registration procedures and offer incentives to the informal sector. A global ceasefire is essential for African countries to sustain their efforts to silence the guns, address violent extremism, and to focus on the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. The African Union and UN, with the full participation of African governments, regional and local actors, should review and adjust conflict prevention and resolution tools in order to effectively and efficiently respond to the ever-changing nature of conflict, violence, and criminality. National governments should ensure the inclusion and participation of women and youth in all aspects of conflict and post-conflict peace processes. The importance of investing in building the capacities of public institutions to play its role in promoting participation and inclusiveness, as well as in delivering public goods. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the underlying causes of instability and conflict. Responses to the pandemic should therefore contribute to the building of trust and promoting dialogue and engagement of all stakeholders. The need for state-society relationship based on trust and a national vision based on consensus. Governance should be built on a compact between government and society, providing transparency, predictability, and minimize discontent. Empathetic leadership is key, and developing such leadership requires governments that understand who they lead and those who understand the pulse of their own societies and internal dynamics rather than responding always to external pressures. Governments should welcome the vulnerable groups, mainly women and youth, as well as refugees, IDPs, and immigrants during the full cycle of the response to COVID-19, including needs assessments, design of education, and other interventions to ensure the effectiveness of the response. As the COVID-19 has shown, women leadership has been more effective in dealing with the pandemic with a comprehensive and inclusive approach. Let us ensure that the measures put in place to respond to the pandemic enhance the contribution that women and girls can do to their societies. It is critical too that we do not cede our virtual space to those who traffic in lies, fear, and hate about the COVID-19 pandemic, as this results in discrimination, hate speech, and xenophobia. Support of the verified campaigns that have been launched by the Secretary General will be critical in this regard. It is timely to do an analysis of the root causes of conflict, this time looking at it from a positive lens and take into consideration the dynamism of youth. In order to deal with the rising authoritarianism, populism, and nationalism, which will inevitably lead to social and political conflict in Africa as a result of COVID-19, it will be critical to strengthen the social compact at the national level between government, private sector, and civil society organizations. Multilateralism and global solidarity are also needed to help deal with the COVID-19 pandemic in Africa. Those are some of the key recommendations that have come up. But before I conclude, allow me to just run through what I heard in the last 3 days. I heard about the need for changing mindsets, that true peace happen over time, that words that are spoken are the weapons of war, that there is no peace without justice. Pandemics don't recognize borders. We need gender-responsive interventions, and the era of not recognizing gender equality is over. Exceptional circumstances call for exceptional solidarity. War is born in the minds of men. I suppose it also includes women. Peace is the presence of development, that we need to strengthen the relationship between state and society in order to build trust. We need to improve on our leadership, a leadership that shows that it cares for its people. That we need to build the Africa's productive capacity. That we need to look at human rights, not only at civil and political rights when we ask people to go and vote, but we want people to have a right to health, to have a right to education, to have a right to a better living. And that, for me, is the pinnacle of human rights. We need to look at women's political and economic leadership, because we were cautioned that if we don't do that, there will be a gap in terms of the leadership that is provided. Right to peace is in short supply, but I believe that with our common humanity, that we can overcome that. I want to give a special thanks to the youth that was with us in the last panel. And I just want to tell you that I was a refugee too in my life. And I would never thought one day I will sit as the Undersecretary General at the UN. Don't despair, do what you do best, and always remind us that people matter. That in whatever we do, it's our common humanity that will make us to overcome. So people matter, livelihoods matter. And I hope that when we discuss issues of silencing the guns and of COVID-19, that it's not just going to be statistics that will matter, but the people behind those statistics do matter. So Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to use this opportunity to express my deepest gratitude to the staff of my office, and in particular the Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Tamrat Samuel. We have been working as one tirelessly team for weeks to make sure this event is a success. I applaud all their efforts. I'm grateful to them for their exemplary hard work and dedication. I would also like to end my remarks by paying once again Our respects to those who have sadly lost their lives during the COVID-19 pandemic, and voice our support for the resolve of those who are still trying to recover from this disease physically, mentally, socioeconomically. Our prayers are with them and their families. And just lastly to say, I look forward to a new, prosperous, stable, peaceful normal that will represent the Africa of today and the Africa of the future. Happy Africa Day next week, and please join the African Union as it celebrates 57 years of its existence and for having provided the leadership that Africa so needs. I thank you all, and thank you once again for your participation in this Africa Dialogue Series 2020. I thank you.
Bringing the human element, the human touch into all of this, into the challenges that we face as a continent, but also in the solutions and the way forward. And on a personal note, let me say congratulations to you on a very successful Africa Dialogue Series for 2020. More than anyone else, you deserve the credit. The Africa Dialogue Series was your brainchild, and you have worked hard to organize and hold 3 successive ADS editions. This third one proved most challenging because of all the uncertainty created by the COVID-19 crisis and the decision to hold it virtually for the first time. There was a time indeed when it looked like it was doomed because of the multiple challenges that we were facing. But you persisted and worked day and night to make it happen and to make it a successful dialogue series. In the process, you became a true inspiration to all of us, especially your staff in OSAA. I personally have really benefited from this. So congratulations, and you have our word at OSAA that we will work to ensure that the outcome of this year's dialogue series is followed through and carried forward for action. I really also appreciate the work done by our OSAA team day and night, the team led by Raul and also Ben, who was really coordinating the team, and everyone else under that team. Thank you very much. The value of having these discussions is not merely to have a forum to exchange views and information, but more importantly, it's to generate new ideas and policy recommendations and some good ideas, as the USG just described them, have emerged from this discussion. Some good thinking and some directions that could be beneficial to all of us, including our governments. So we in OSAA have been taking notes copiously. We shall distill and capture the key messages, the takeaways, and we'll be sharing them with everyone in the coming weeks. And lastly, let me thank everyone for the patience in terms of really participating in a virtual exercise like this. I think we got better by the day. I think if we had gone for another few days, we would have become experts in this, but like all good things, this also has to come to an end. So thank you, all participants, including those who were there only listening and only able to pose questions through the chat box. We've had some really lively and very thoughtful discussion with many good ideas. And so I really thank participants for their patience and and I hope you have found it useful from whatever perspective you come from. While Africa has its challenges, it also has its dedicated daughters and sons, and true friends and partners, and the United Nations being at the forefront of that. So thank you, Goodbye. This ends the 2020 edition of the Africa Dialogue series. Thank you and goodbye.